I've been working for over 4 years for British Arriva before it was taken over by Deutsche Bahn. So I was working for Sunderland. I was very proud to do so because we had a very lean structure. Exactly what I understood, that this is typical British way. So there was only my boss, the Executive Technics Europe. I reported to him directly, and he reported to his board. That was all.
Okay.
And now today I heard that you have, besides the beautiful private structures, you have something like a central committee called Government or Transport Minister, who every 2 days changes his ideas of how it would work, and then you are losing many of the benefits that in the theory might have given with the privatization. So could you please give us, Herr Professor, of course, could you please give us a short overview how today's structure of British rail industry, or what we say branch, or British rail system is working? What is the main characteristics nowadays?
Okay, the British rail system has been made very complicated. So it used to be just British Rail, which was one company. It owned all the tracks, it owned all the trains, it decided what services it wanted to run. And then in the 90s, they decided to privatise the railway, but they did it in a way which was designed to promote competition. Competition between train operators, competition between rolling stock companies, the people that rent the trains, competition between infrastructure, maintenance companies, competition between train building companies. So that meant that they had to split British Rail into about 100 different companies, each one doing its own thing. And now what that means is you've got 100 different profit centres, all sorts of different contracts between every single company, and it's expensive to run, and it's a complicated structure. So, for example, if my train is late, I run a train, my train is late, then I have to pay the train operators whose other trains I make late. I have to pay the Network Rail, the company that owns the tracks, because I'm using their infrastructure in a bad way. But if they make my train late, they have to pay me, because I have to pay customers, because I have an obligation if I'm late, and then they have to pay the other train companies as well. So there's armies of lawyers, armies of administrators who are working out all of these extremely difficult things. Then the government, which owns Network Rail, decides that it wants more people to use the train, so it wants to invest in the railway. But it has become very expensive to invest in the railway. The reason why is because we didn't invest for such a long time that we lost the capacity for procurement, to be good procurers, and we also lost the project leadership and other capacities you need to build lots of new infrastructure. So they decided they want to invest, and then of course they try to do too much at once. We haven't got the capability to do all of these things, and so the project costs go up, and then the minister says, "Ooh, this is too expensive, we'll cancel that, we'll stop doing that," and then the project is stopped halfway. So they buy new trains for lines which are going to be electric, and then the lines are no longer electric. So they have to put diesel engines in the electric trains.
Couldn't you sell them to another franchise and purchase diesel at once?
Well, potentially. We have these companies called rolling stock companies, and they own the trains, and then they lease them to the train operators. Now, because there's been so many new trains bought in Britain recently, which is great, but what it does mean is that there are now too many trains of certain types. So we're going to have too many electric trains, but not enough electric lines. And we haven't got enough diesel trains, but we've got too many diesel lines. So, and it's all very strange.
But this seems to indicate that there is a lack of planning. I always understood that the so-called planned economy, what was the so-called Eastern economy, was not really having a good plan, but a good capitalist has to have a plan, otherwise he is going bankrupt. Now, you seem to like competition, but still it would usually go bankrupt if if it would be completely privately, so something is not running too well.
I think the big mistake that we make in Britain, it's all the fault of the government. The government wants to be seen to promote competition, but the government still likes to have control, and to an extent that's fine because it pays £5-6 billion a year in subsidy. But politicians are neither planners nor business people, and there's the problem. So they can't make a plan and stick to it, but they can't let the railway business people be business people, and so there's this problem where the railway wants to do lots of things and build lots of new kit and invest lots and have lots of better services for passengers, but the government doesn't stick to a plan long enough to allow the railway companies to deliver it. And then the government's always now complaining that things are costing too much and this, that and the other, but that's precisely because we don't have a long-term plan. If we had a long-term plan, we could build up our capacity to electrify lines, to replace signal systems, all of these kinds of things. But there's very, very little expertise in the UK that are able to do these things. You know, signalling systems are extremely expensive in Britain because we don't have a British signalling industry. We have to buy it all in, and then there may only be one or two companies who do our work, and then the government cancels the project, and then the companies say, well, we're not going to invest in Britain or in building our competence base up in Britain because the government might change its mind. So the ministers are neither planners nor business people, and these things, it would seem to me, are necessary. It's necessary to have a good plan and to have good business sense if you are going to have a privatised railway system.
What about pressure groups? I mean, the customers should be on the side of the rail companies in this case, to have a joint pressure group to simply tell them, let the industry alone, do what we just heard from the German ministry. The output is important, but don't try to mess up with the input, otherwise there will not be a good output.
That's right, but the problem is the Minister for Transport likes to confuse the issue. So recently, for example, we've had terrible problems with introducing a huge new timetable in the south of England. So they had a lot of infrastructure, new infrastructure. It's called Thameslink, the project. It's really very impressive. Complete new train fleet, nice German Siemens trains. And they had to have a new timetable to increase the frequency. But the government delayed decisions about what could be allowed, what should not be allowed, and so on. And so the rail industry had so little time to plan for this that it's gone completely wrong. Hundreds and hundreds of trains are being cancelled over the last weeks, and will be into the coming weeks as they get this new plan ready, because they couldn't train drivers, because the trains would be going over new routes, they didn't have enough drivers trained, all of these kinds of things. So the Transport Minister stands up in Parliament and blames Network Rail, timetablers, and says that if they'd have got their timetable ready in time, then we would never have had these problems. But so the customers are confused. So they only use the train company, so they think it's the train company's fault. The minister is blaming Network Rail because he said that the Network Rail couldn't get its timetables right, and so no one really knows who is actually at fault, when we all know, well, those of us in the industry know, that the primary fault lies with the Transport Minister.
What is his role in this? I mean, the infrastructure should be competent in appliance with the companies to establish the timetable. We know the technical conditions of this class, so that we know what kind of acceleration you have and whatsoever.
Yep.
So all figures are known, all stations are known, where
Yep.
to stop, how long it takes to stop. So this is no work at all for any kind of politicians, I guess.
That's absolutely correct. And the rail industry was very, very clear that this new timetable was going to be a very, very big thing to do, and they had been planning or they'd wanted to plan for for years. They set up a group with representatives of all the companies involved, so that there was a high-level working group, and they proposed after a review, or it was proposed after a review, that the original timetable change, which was complete changing across huge areas of southeast England, was going to be too big to do in one go. So they decided to do it in stages. They recommended that to Network Rail, but then the government got involved because they were saying, well, hang on a minute, we're paying for all of this infrastructure, we want a say in what's going to happen. But they delayed the decision about what would be allowed to happen for months. That delay meant that all of these new train services going to different places, they couldn't train the drivers in time because they need the route knowledge. And so when the timetable actually came in, they just couldn't run the trains because they didn't have the drivers who knew knew the routes. So it's absolutely outrageous that the government, as you say, is involved in that level of detail. The train companies know what they're doing. Let the government set a long-term strategic objective, and then let the train companies deliver against that.
Yeah. What about ticketing? I saw on your website that you have been writing scientific research on ticketing for buses, and I think this is a very important question as well if we want to have a successful rail or combined rail bus system, so that for the customer it is not even visible whether there are 5 or 6 companies involved on one of his trips. He just wants to have an integrated ticket. How easy this is to get it. Like Deutsche Bahn is offering the ticket from my home place. I take the S-Bahn to the station. From the station I went to Erfurt. Here I can take the tram or whatsoever, and it is all in one ticket. Is this the same system in Great Britain? How is it working?
Yes, it is. One of the things they did when they privatised the railway is they made sure that we call it ticket interoperability. This ticket interoperability was kept throughout the network. So I can buy one ticket and use it on any train to get from where I start with a different train company to where I finish. And then I can add it's called Plus Bus, which is the equivalent of the adding the local transport on afterwards. So for an extra £2 or £3, I can then use the buses in the city I arrive at when I get there. So yes, that has been retained. What you can also do, though, is if you choose to travel on a specific train that is run by a specific company, you can choose to buy a ticket which is only valid with that company, and it's normally cheaper. So if I buy the interoperable ticket between London and Brighton, it means I can use Thameslink or Southern, whichever train I want to, I can get. But I can buy, if I want to, a Southern only ticket, which is normally a bit cheaper, or a Thameslink only ticket, which is normally a bit cheaper.
But not considerably. I checked it once I was checking the prices from London to Wales, and I basically didn't see any difference. It was more or less the same whether to change to Arriva at the very end, because the longest way was nevertheless for the one company. So I could stick to the one I'm purchasing, but for the rest of it I had to pay considerably much. So what we heard about the prices, I had the impression that the price tickets are more expensive than in Germany. You don't have these kind of Sparpreis up to the last 3 days, because I purchased for Erfurt 3 days ago, and it was for 35, and today it would have been 65. So 3 days up front is still a very big difference in Germany. You don't have this much differences in Great Britain over some days. Huh?
Well, yes and no. It's done on a yield management basis, like the airlines do, like EasyJet or Ryanair or whatever. So if I book 2 months in advance, there will be lots of very, very cheap tickets still available. So from Manchester to London, might be able to do that for £10 or something. But if I book 6 weeks in advance, those very cheapest tickets will have gone, and you'll get to the next price step. So it might be £20 would be the cheapest, and then when you get to 3 weeks in advance, those will have gone as well. So it might be £40 as the cheapest, and the closer you get to the day of travel, the more likely it is that you'll pay a higher price. And of course, if you go then actually on the day of travel itself and buy your ticket, then you pay the regular standard off-peak or open price, which is the most expensive. So there's an enormous range. The range is generally greater than it is here in Germany. The very cheapest tickets are very cheap, but the last-minute tickets that you buy on the day can be very expensive. So whereas here, you get a 50% or 25% of cost, 50% of cost, full price or whatever. In Britain, there's a much bigger range. So the tickets will go from anything between £10 and £250 for the same journey.
We don't have £250 for us. This is why the difference is so much. If we would not allow to have such prices, there is 175 or so, I guess, at the top. But what about the information obligation on the stations? Is there one integrated information system on the stations for all companies using that same station, so that you don't have to walk around and have a look for, okay, this is Virgin train, but now where do I go back? Oh, this is this. How is it working?
Yeah, it's all integrated information system. So just like in Germany, when you arrive at the station, the departure board is there, and it lists all of the trains. It will tell you who is running the train. So the announcements would say, the southeastern train to Dover or whatever will leave from platform 4, but everything is run as a integrated information system, and they're also all the train companies are now moving towards using one information system across the entire industry. There used to be lots of different behind the scenes. The customer would not see those. So if I use my app, for example, it used to be powered by different information than powers the station destination boards and different information that the train companies get and so on. But now that's all coming together.
Okay. So and what about this Roscoe that you have to lease the trains from a separate company? I think it has some benefits, because regardless who wins the franchise, the trains will have a use, and nobody is really losing money when you have to give the trains back. And on the other hand side, you cannot have your own corporate identity with trains that are not your own. It is much more difficult to say that we have this kind of seats of a certain company that we like best. So how would you say the benefit of this situation, or where is the problem?
Well, you're right. In theory, no one should lose money, because when one franchise ends, the trains can go on to the next franchise. But what we're seeing at the moment is that because the cost of borrowing money is so low, new franchises are coming in and completely replacing their fleets with brand new trains. So some of the trains which the previous franchise used, in some cases which are very, very new, 1 year, 2 years old, are being sent back to the rolling stock companies because they're being replaced by yet more brand new trains, which is interesting.
But that is allowed to do so. You don't have to take it from the leasing company.
No, it depends upon the way the contract is specified. Yeah, so it could be that there is a specification in the contract that says you must use these trains, but that's not the case in all of them at all. And because the government likes to say, these are private companies, they should be able to buy their own or choose their own rolling stock. But they don't always do that. The government, as I have described elsewhere, is very much involved in specifying and buying rolling stock. Now, it's okay, because the companies lease the trains, they can paint them whatever colour they like, they can make them look however they want, and in most cases they also specify the quality of the interior and that kind of thing. But the government is always somewhere in the background, because it controls the amount of subsidy that the train company is going to get in its franchise. So if a company says, in franchise competition, if one company says, let's say Arriva says, we're going to provide these splendid trains with lots of legroom and we're going to have only 70 seats per carriage as opposed to 85, so we need to buy 100 more carriages. And then First comes along and says, we're going to have 90 seats per carriage, so we actually don't need any extra carriages, so we're going to increase capacity but have no extra carriages. The government goes, lots of extra expenditure, no extra expenditure. Let's go with the cheaper one. So in this way, so the government is still involved with the way in which rolling stock is bought and used, because it controls how much subsidy is paid. So it's.
But do they decide at what company to buy the trains?
In some circumstances, yes. So the new. I know it's ridiculous. So in the new Great Western trains and the new trains going between London and Edinburgh on London and North Eastern, they were bought from Hitachi, and it was the government that decided that those trains should come from Hitachi, and the government decided what the specification should be and so on. Whereas in other instances, Virgin on the west coast between London and Glasgow, they said, we want to buy new trains, these are the trains we're going to buy, and so on. East Anglia is the same. So they've just bought a complete fleet replacement from Stadler in Switzerland and from Bombardier in England. And they decided they wanted to do that. So it depends.
This Hitachi was very strange to me. I mean, I'm not against the trains as such, but usually I thought that one might try to support their own country's industry. There is not so much of industry left, probably. So that was strange that and now you say it's the government.
Well, absolutely.
And now we heard that we have to leave the European market because we have to support their own industry. But before they went to Far East. Where is the logic in this?
I always struggle to find logic in the British government. I mean, you're absolutely right. So all of the new trains for the big Thameslink project, the one where all the timetables went wrong. All of those trains are Siemens, and they're very, very well built trains, as you would expect. But the government then, when it gave the contract for the East-West line, the Crossrail line that goes through London, there was such an outcry that a British train builder had not been given the contract, that they then gave the next contract to Bombardier to build all of the trains for the Crossrail line in England. And then the Hitachi ones are almost all assembled in England, in a new factory up in the north of England. So they're not entirely built, but they are assembled, and there's lots of British companies involved in there. So that was important in awarding the contract.
Others might do the same. I mean, Stadler had built up their own company in Poland, and now is very successful with this. They are selling from the Polish company to Netherlands, for example. So certainly, if there would be, as you say, a strategy, a long-term strategy, others might build up their plants in Great Britain as well.
Yeah, but and you've hit the nail on the head there. The strategy is something that British governments find extremely difficult. They always work on tactics. It's always short term with the British government. Strategy is extraordinarily complicated for them. They don't like it because they are too influenced by headlines, and and so they change their minds and they do something different and so on. But if that is the answer to our problems in Britain with the railway. I mean, yes, we've got lots to celebrate. Huge increases in passenger numbers, which is brilliant. Huge amounts of investment in new trains, lots of additional services. This is magnificent. Unfortunately, it costs much more than it should do. We don't have as much infrastructure as we should do, and building new infrastructure is incredibly expensive because the government keeps changing its mind and won't stick to a straight strategy. It's a mixture. It's successes and problems.
Last question. When I'm using trains in Great Britain, I think they are so small. I mean, the tube is so small, and being a tourist, when I was carrying luggage, and others also did so, there really was no space to leave them because it's all so tiny,
Yep.
like it was from the steam time.
Yep.
Isn't it really possible to enlarge the gauge a little bit to build higher bridges and so? I mean, if the trains come from France, you have more space and you feel probably like on the Russian train, like I feel in Russia in comparison to the Berlin train. But when I go to a British train, it is like narrow gauge. That would be much more comfort if there could be a change in that direction.
That's right. The loading gauge in Britain is smaller than the standard in Europe, and as a result, then the trains are narrower
and the trains are more expensive. You can't buy something from the scratch if you don't have the UIC norms and so on. From that point of view, that makes it more expensive.
That's right. But they have in the past, British Rail, the government, has judged that it's cheaper or better still to keep the same loading gauge rather than rebuild every tunnel, every bridge, every lower tracks.
There was no with investments going on.
Yeah,
if they would go on.
If they that's the thing.
You have to do all the electric lines. So on that way, usually many things are possible.
That's right. I mean, yes, you're right. On the Great Western Line, for example, they've had to raise a lot of bridges, lower tracks, all these kinds of things.
Gone into this.
They could have done, but then
just because this is the benefit of this separated system of franchising, if you keep for this and you say, okay, this line it's one line, okay, and it will keep one line. It will not be back British Rail that the same train has to run to Wales or Scotland. So then you can do this, okay.
Well, we've kind of come full circle in the British railway industry in the sense that when it was first built, it was all lots of different private companies who built in Great Western. They built them very wide, and it was standard gauge everywhere else. So each company built its railways to slightly different, maybe tighter curves or platforms and were slightly different, or bridges were slightly different, or whatever. And now we've come full circle. We've got lots of different train companies again. So there's a tension because while on the one hand it would be strategically over the long term better to treat the whole thing as one system, we still have trains which are ordered for particular lines, and I mean that's British Rail did that as well. That's historically the case. But we have trains which are built and ordered for one set of lines, and increasingly, or when Cross Country had its new trains built 15 years ago. They had to be built so they could operate anywhere on the network, and they are by far the worst of all of the trains. They're horrible. They're incredibly cramped. They're very, very incredibly uncomfortable, and you're supposed to travel 8 hours on them. They're absolutely horrible. So yeah, we've got this problem that it's not. Whenever we've done gauge work on one particular line, they haven't necessarily done it elsewhere, and that will get worse now, or rather it won't improve, because now we have bi-mode trains. In fact, we've got tri-mode trains now. We've got diesel, DC electric and AC electric on the same train. So
but all this equipment needs more space, so it is taking space from the passenger places. If you don't already for the German trains, it's difficult to implement all the comfort what you need. So the air condition here and new safety system there, and for such small trains, I think it's technically very difficult.
It is, and the one answer to it that they could have done is at least have longer trains, because if you can't have wider trains, then buy more carriages.
Longer platforms, of course.
Yeah, longer. Well, that's okay because they do that all over the place. So
how many meters or how you say, I don't know, yards or what you have? I mean, with 220, I think it's for the ICE. So should be something around that.
Yeah, the new platforms for Crossrail are all built to accommodate 9-coach trains, so there's some being extended, and a lot of the main platforms are much longer. So Paddington in London can get 10 or 11-coach trains in these kinds of things. Oh, okay. So it is.
So that would be okay to have some
longer trains, yeah, and that's indeed what Great Western have done. So they've moved from 8 carriages to 10, and the carriages are 26 metres instead of 23 metres.
And we have a little bit better comfort.
Yeah, there's more. Yes, in the new train.
So I like your company.
Yeah. Yes, that is good that we have more legroom and so on. Yeah. So next time you're over and you travel on Great Western, it should be a different experience.
Oh, I will be very delighted.
Yeah.
Many thanks, and I hope we stay in contact. Okay.
Absolutely. So, thank you very much indeed.